Cannabis, now reduced to counterculture memes, recreational smoke, and marketing slogans, was once considered one of the most enigmatic sacred keys in ancient times. And not just any key, but the kind that, when turned, doesn't just open doors. It disarms walls, lifts veils, tears through realities. Remember, keys are not made to be idolized. They exist to be inserted into the right portals, at the right moments, by clean hands and clear intent. But in the frenzy of contemporary culture, we've forgotten what those doors are and what might emerge when opened without preparation. In ancient India, Vedic texts and oracular traditions like the Atharva Veda cited cannabis as one of the 5 holiest plants on earth. Its name whispered power, gift of the gods, bearer of Amrita, the celestial nectar of immortality. This is not poetic metaphor, it's symbolic coding of its entheogenic nature, that is, its capacity to reveal the divine within when placed in a high-frequency ritual context. Its association with Shiva, the great destroyer and regenerator, is not a cultural footnote, it's a metaphysical map. Shiva isn't just a god, he's the archetypal consciousness of ego dissolution, illusion destruction, and liberation from form. The fire in his eyes is not wrath, it's truth, and cannabis, as his sacrament, shares that same fire. Among the sadhus, ascetics who abandoned the world to plunge into the absolute, cannabis was never recreational. It was used in specific rituals involving fasting, Vedic chants, extreme isolation, prolonged silence, and burning in clay chillums. The goal was never relaxation, it was confrontation. To stare into the eyes of symbolic death, to pass through ego, not inflate it. Nothing there was casual. The body and mind had to be prepared before using the plant, because they knew it doesn't bring answers, it removes filters, and what's left isn't always pretty. In the East, among 4th century Taoist masters like Jung, cannabis was considered part of the alchemical arsenal for spiritual expansion. It was mixed with other herbs like jinang to induce lucid dreams, astral projections, and archetypal visions. But Jung warned, the body is an instrument, and the key, the vital energy, must be balanced. Otherwise, the plant only amplifies imbalance, echoing confusion where clarity was sought. The plant is neutral, but the user's field never is. It's an amplifier of the unconscious. And like any amplifier, it doesn't decide what will be transmitted. It just turns up the volume. And here lies the first paradox. The more untrained the musician, the more deafening the dissonance. In the Islamic Arab world, especially among the esoteric branches of medieval Sufism, cannabis, more often hashish, was not used as a narcotic, but as an instrument of ego dissolution, not for distraction, but for disintegration. The dervishes and fakers, wandering mystics with burning souls, knew the plant was no path to pleasure, but a sharp blade that cut the chains of identity. The central goal of Sufism is fana, the annihilation of the self in the presence of the beloved, the fusion with the absolute. In certain initiative circles, cannabis use was tolerated as a mystical trigger, provoking ecstatic visions and flashes of unity, but only when subordinate to practice, dhikr, repetition of divine names, silence, ethics, and a master's guidance to distinguish real ecstasy from narcissistic delusion. Even so, Sufism always carried a warning. Jalal ad-Din Rumi, perhaps Islam's most beloved mystical poet, once said, with a tenderness that stings, "Why seek God in intoxication when He already dances sober within you?" This is not moralism, it's alchemy. It reveals the subtle risk of spiritual intoxication, the risk of mistaking expansion for elevation and ecstasy for evolution. And this is where traditions like Kabbalah add a new dimension of caution. Though Kabbalistic texts don't explicitly mention cannabis, perhaps due to historical context or mystical discretion, their message remains clear. Misunderstood light becomes denser darkness. The Zohar, Judaism's esoteric core, warns, "He who forces the gates of light without purification will be devoured by his own projections." It's not about the plant, but about the inner readiness of the operator. Higher worlds won't show sublime visions, only magnified reflections of ignorance. In Kabbalistic language, this is called klipoth, psychic shells formed when spiritual forces are accessed in impure ways. It's like trying to channel electricity without grounding. Instead of illumination, you get a short circuit. Translated psychologically, this means, every portal without ethics becomes an abyss. Every unintegrated glimpse becomes accumulated shadow, the illusion of progress, the cosmic ego that believes it's enlightened simply because it felt something intense. At this point, all traditions converge. Without ethics, preparation, and living tradition, the sacred plant becomes a trap, not by divine punishment, but by natural resonance. Because all portals, everyone, demand maturity. The key alone does not determine the destination. In unofficial Christian traditions, those that flourished on the margins of imperial orthodoxy, the presence of cannabis is suggested not by direct declarations, but through hidden traces, veiled inscriptions, and forgotten practices. Archaeological studies by figures like Raphael Mechoulam, the father of modern cannabinoid research, and Sula Bennett, one of the first scholars to link the Hebrew term kane bom to cannabis, have opened gaps in traditional readings of the Old Testament. Kane bom, mentioned in the book of Exodus as part of the sacred anointing oil ingredients, was used by priests and prophets to anoint kings, altars, and liturgical instruments. If this resin was indeed cannabis, and the linguistic evidence is strong, then we're facing a silent revelation. The plant was part of the sacred long before it became taboo. But here too, as in all serious traditions, there was no room for recreation. The oil was applied with reverence. Its aroma, its density, its energy penetrated not only the skin, but the veils of the subtle body. It was an invocation, not a distraction, a portal, not a perfume. At the edges of Roman Christianity, the Gnostics understood oils and incenses not merely as symbols, but as conductors of pneuma, the divine breath. When cannabis was present, it was used to facilitate prophetic states, visions, clairvoyance, initiatory dreams. But what mattered was never the substance, it was the symbolic field sustaining it. And this is exactly what modern culture destroyed. By separating plant from ritual, it also separated presence from purpose. The sacred does not reside in the plant, but in the relationship established with it. In African and Afro-Indigenous traditions, especially within Bantu lineages, Congo practices, Umbanda and Candomblé temples, and the shamanic rituals of the Amazon rainforest, cannabis, though not always central, is understood within a universal principle, oxay. Oxay is the vital force, the spiritual energy that permeates all things. In the world of herbs, every leaf carries a specific oxay, a vibrational signature. No plant is neutral. All have destiny, purpose, spirit. Using a plant without knowing its oxay is like invoking a spirit without knowing its name. You open the door, but don't know whom you're inviting. In the syncretic fabric of these traditions, especially in oracular, musical, and ritual practice, cannabis, when used, is surrounded by prayers, sung chants, offerings, smudging, and guidance. It is not consumed to escape pain, but to move through it. That's why in many Afro-diasporic religions, the drum is not an instrument, it's an oracle. The smoke is not smoke, it's language. The silence between beats is not a pause, it's a message. And in this same spirit, if you inhale a sacred plant without understanding its oxay, its sound, its lineage, its vibration, it's like playing an ancestral drum without knowing to which orisha it belongs. There will be no music, only noise. Even among Rastafarians, where cannabis is elevated to the status of supreme sacrament and called ganja, its use is neither casual nor permissive. It is the herb of wisdom, mentioned in the scriptures as the healing of the nations. but never used as a personal escape. It is a link to the divine, a pact, a spiritual vow made before the community, the earth, and Jah. Smoking, within the Rastafari universe, is not a habit, it is liturgy. Ganja is lit during reasoning sessions, moments of deep reflection, living spirituality, spoken prayer, and silent listening. The rising smoke is not just smoke, it is incense. It is the word. It is the sacred, translated into mist. The group forms a circle symbolizing the unity of creation, the equality of brothers, the eternity of the spirit. There, the word is ritual. Listening is prayer. The smoke is sacrament. There is no rush, no noise, only presence. In that smoke, the individual does not disconnect from the world, they realign with it. Cannabis does not serve as an escape from pain, but as a path through it. It is used as a mystical eye that sees beyond colonization, oppression, and the spiritual rupture imposed by the system. The Rastafari movement was born in 1930s Jamaica as a rebellion against colonial logic, but also as a restoration of African roots, spiritual dignity, and symbolic autonomy of a people. For the Rastas, Jah is the living and present God, not an abstract concept, but an immanent, pulsing, organic energy. Ganja is the plant that reconnects with this presence. To smoke it is a political, theological, and ancestral act. But the Rastafarians are not the only ones who know this secret. In the heart of the African continent, among the Bantu, Kimbundu, and Congo traditions, there are records of ritual cannabis use in funerals, rites of passage, harvest celebrations, and communication with ancestors. In all these contexts, the plant was not a tool of alienation. It was an instrument of presence. It was lit to remember, never to forget. Inhaled to deepen the now, never to escape it. In the indigenous world of the Americas, although cannabis is not native, its role was recognized and welcomed within ancestral ritual structures, and most importantly, these structures never allowed solitude as a form of spiritual contact. The sacred is collective. It is danced. It is sung. It is sustained by the group. Cannabis use outside collective context is a scream that disperses. Inside ritual, it becomes sacred speech. Among the shamans of the Amazon, the use of any power plant demands a map, a song, a diet, a guide. The plant is never alone. She dances with the drum. She walks with the chant. She bows to silence. In ancestral traditions, no one journeys alone. Because they knew, the isolated soul is vulnerable, and a plant that opens portals needs a circle to hold them. At the ritual's heart, the individual dissolves, and in dissolving is purified, and in purification is reborn. And here we return to the most forgotten core of this whole matter. Cannabis has a cultural soul. It is spirit, but it does not float in a vacuum. It is plant consciousness, but it carries in its sap all the narratives it's been wrapped in. It is a living symbol, an archetypal mirror, a vessel of meaning. When placed in a ritual context, it acts as sacrament. When inhaled in the darkness of a lonely room, it tends to amplify exactly what the user fears most. Is it neutral? Yes, but neutral does not mean empty. It means potential. And potential only manifests in the form shaped by the surrounding field. Just as water takes the shape of its container, cannabis takes the shape of the cultural and spiritual unconscious it enters. And what has modernity done? It tore the plant from its temple and threw it onto the stages of the market, stripped it of its liturgical mantle and dressed it in advertising slogans, replaced ancestral silence with anesthetic playlists. The herb that once invoked gods now sells t-shirts. The hemp of wisdom became a meme. The sacrament became aesthetic. The sacred became fetish. And this process was not accidental. It was symptomatic. In its rush to break from institutionalized religion, postmodern Western culture fell into the opposite trap. Spirituality without ritual, ecstasy without structure, insight without practice, altars without ground. The psychedelic culture of the 1960s tried, it's true, to reclaim some of this, but it did so without lineage, initiation, or maps. They listened to Alan Watts, read Timothy Leary, mixed acid with ganja and political slogans. They sought transcendence, but without roots. The ecstasy came, but passed, and no one knew how to sustain the expansion. As Aldous Huxley warned in The Doors of Perception, the visionary experience may reveal, but it does not teach. It shows, but does not structure. It shines, but does not anchor. The danger is subtle, to confuse glimpse with illumination, to feel with transformation, to swell with growth. And in the void left by the dissolution of traditional rituals, cannabis became a symbol of counterculture, aesthetic rebellion, and pop freedom, but almost never of spiritual responsibility. That's why, in the traditions where the plant remains sacred, it is never used alone. The collective is the temple, the group is the guide, the circle is the compass. Without this, what should be a bridge becomes an abyss. In Afro-Amerindian rituals, for example, cannabis, when present, is surrounded by chants, cycles, smoke, fasting. There are limits, there are guides, there are rhythms. There, the individual does not seek expansion. They seek dissolution, because they understand that the sacred only descends when the ego falls silent. And without this symbolic structure, the plant loses its sanctity. It becomes just another stimulus, entertainment disguised as enlightenment. And at this point, the trap is more dangerous than ever. It makes you believe you're advancing, but in truth, you're only spinning around yourself, like an empty drum that sounds pretty but carries no essence. And perhaps the greatest danger is not the explicit collapse, but the subtle self-deception. The delusion of believing that to feel is the same as to transform, that expansion equals elevation, that getting emotional equals evolving. Not all expansion is ascension. Sometimes it's just swelling. And swelling, as we well know, is not growth. It's accumulation. And accumulation, when undigested, overflows, bursts, implodes. This is the most invisible risk of cannabis used without consciousness. The sensation of progress without real progress. The body relaxes, but the soul stagnates. The mind opens, but discernment evaporates. Intuition seems to bloom, but no wisdom sustains it. It's what the Kabbalists call kelipot, energetic shells that form when spiritual experiences are not integrated into concrete reality. They are fragments of unanchored light, particles of unprocessed vision, glimmers that accumulate like luminous dust in the auric field, generating an illusion, the illusion of evolution, when in fact one is just spinning in colorful circles. It's a cruel paradox. The more you feel, the less you act. The more you access, the less you transform. Because there is no grounding, no structure, no firm spiritual body. And in this vulnerable psychic environment, cannabis ceases to be a sacred plant and becomes the plant of stagnation. Not because it carries that energy, but because the soil it was planted in already did. It doesn't create passivity, it reveals it. It doesn't produce escapism, it amplifies what was already latent. It doesn't paralyze the soul, It simply shows that it was already paralyzed. What happens then is a simulation of spirituality, an aesthetic of awakening, an internal theater where consciousness believes it's advancing, while the heart remains locked. And the most used argument, "but I feel at peace," becomes, ironically, the biggest proof of the illusion. Because peace generated by an external agent is like the breeze from a fan. It's not real wind, it's manufactured wind. True peace is rooted. It is born in the midst of chaos. It remains when everything outside trembles. It is not induced, it is earned. If cannabis is giving you peace, great. But if that peace only exists with it, then maybe it's not peace, it's suspension. It's anesthetic silence, not presence. And once again, the plant is not to blame. It is merely the perfect stage for the consciousness that already dwells in you. Cannabis is an ancestral mirror that, for millennia, was placed in the hands of priests, masters, and healers. But a mirror doesn't only show what you want to see. It shows what's hidden, what's been rejected, what the soul has denied for too long. The true spiritual path was never about feeling more, but about sustaining more. Sustaining truth even when it burns. Sustaining silence even when the mind screams. Sustaining lucidity even when sensation invites forgetting. Cannabis, like every power plant, demands posture. Not moral posture, but vibrational posture. A state of readiness. It demands inner silence, clarity of intention, and ritual humility. Without that, what could be a portal becomes a shortcut, and shortcuts, as we know, almost always lead to the vicious circle of illusion. You don't need to abandon the plant, but maybe you need to be reborn in your relationship with it. Understand that its power is not in what it offers, but in what it provokes, and that true discernment is not about feeling more, but about being more present. It's easy to feel spiritual under the plant's effect. The hard part is being spiritual in everyday chaos, in traffic, in pain, in loss, in anger, in a bank line. True transformation happens after the effect fades. That's when we know if there was truth or just another escape disguised as wisdom. Cannabis can be a ladder or an abyss, a key or a shackle, a mirror or a veil. It does not define, it only reveals. What you do with it is what defines your path. If you've made it this far, it's because something within you already knows that spirituality is not a game. That awakening is not glamour, nor marketing, nor pretty smoke in slow motion. It's tearing veils. It's holding truths. It's crossing the shadow until you find a new sun behind closed eyes. Write in the comments, "Mirror of Light." That's how I'll know you crossed this portal with me, with presence, with courage, and with a thirst for truth. This video demanded more than hours of creation. It demanded study, contemplation, reverence for sacred traditions, and the responsibility of treating with dignity something that today has been turned into a meme. If this message touched you, gift us with your like. It helps the algorithm reach those who still don't understand that spirituality without discernment is just a well-wrapped illusion. Subscribe to AI Spirit and share this video with someone who thinks they're ascending, but may actually just be running away. True peace is not induced, it is built. And true light only shines where the shadow has already been seen.